Hello students, I hope all of you are well. So today I'll be starting a new chapter, and that is from the forms of government, and that is your parliamentary and presidential forms of government. Okay, so but before we start this chapter, so let us do the quick recap of the previous chapters which we have finished. So meaning of the unitary states we have done, and this features and the merits and demerits we have already finished this one. So next one we have discussed about meaning of the federal state, the features and the merits and demerits, and next one we have discussed about features of UK as a unitary states, and recently I have uploaded the videos and where I have discussed about India as a quasi-federal states. So I request each and every students to kindly check the videos, okay, and please note down the important points, okay, and if you don't understand any of the subtopics, so please kindly do ask me whenever we do the online classes, okay. So now let's begin with the parliamentary forms of government. Okay, so introductions. On the basis of the nature of the relationships between the legislature and the executive, the two alternative forms of government, it stands identified, and they are your parliamentary form and they are your presidential forms of government. Okay, so students, in this type of government, that means in this parliamentary form of government, okay, it postulates a close relationships between the legislature, which is a lawmaking body, and the executive, which is a law implementing body. Okay, it postulates a close relationship between whom and whom, between the legislature and between the executive. Okay, and in this type of government you can also see that executives holds a direct responsibility towards the legislature. Okay, so towards the lawmaking body. Okay, so India mostly follows what systems of government? We follow a parliamentary systems of government. Okay, and the parliament of government, okay, the parliamentary form of government which exists in India, it has been borrowed from where? It has been borrowed from the British political system. Okay, it's borrowed from the British political system, and it's also known as the Westminster model of the government. Okay, because the origin and the growth of such type of government, that means the parliamentary form of government, students, it took place in where? In the British political system. Okay, and in it the Westminster has been the home of the British Parliament. Okay, so the Parliament of Britain, okay, so the British Parliament is situated in Westminster. That is why the name Westminster model is often been used for referring to the parliamentary government. I hope it's clear, right? So the parliamentary form of government is also known as the Westminster model of the government, and the parliamentary form of government which exists in India is borrowed from where? From the British political system. Okay, so India mostly follows a parliamentary system. Okay, India follows a parliamentary systems in which the Prime Minister is the presiding head of the government. Okay, and the chief of the executive of the government. Okay, so the Indian parliamentary system, it runs around the concept of cooperations and coordinations between the legislative and the executive organ. Okay, so there is a close and continuous relationships between the legislature and the executive in this type of government, that means in this parliamentary form of government. Okay, so when we see in the other hand, in the presidential forms of government, okay, it postulates a separation, students. It postulates a separations of powers between the legislature and the executive. That means they are not interdependent on each other. Okay, they are independent on their work. Okay, so they are independent on each other. So executive is not responsible to the legislature, and legislature is not responsible towards the executive. Okay, so both the parliamentary and presidential forms are the two distinct and they are the alternative forms. Both are, however, democratic in organizations and they're working. Okay, so both have been working successfully in different states, such as parliamentary forms of government, it's working in India and your UK. Okay, and the presidential forms of government in USA. Okay, I hope it's clear. Now let us discuss about the meaning of the parliamentary form of government. So the parliamentary government is named so because it is constituted by those members of the parliament who are in majority, and in it the executive is responsible and subordinate to the parliament. Okay, It means, students, that I have already told you before also, there is a close relationship. There is a close and continuous relationship between the legislature and the executive, because executive is constituted out from the legislature. That is why they have a close and continuous relationships. Okay, and in this type of system, like in the systems of the legislative and executive relationship, students, the leader of the majority in the legislature, the leader of the majority in the legislatures has been appointed as the head of the government. You have to listen to me very, very carefully, students. The leader of the majority in the legislature has been appointed as what? As appointed as the head of the government. Okay, and the head of the government is your prime minister. Okay, that is your prime minister. And upon his recommendation, that means upon the recommendations of whom? Upon the recommendation of prime ministers. Okay, or the ministers. Other, that means Union Council of Ministers, students. Okay, those ministers are appointed out of the legislators. Okay, so belonging to his party. I hope I'm clear till here, right? So the prime ministers and the other ministers continue to be the member of the legislatures even after becoming the heads of the executive departments, because executive has been constituted out of the legislatures. I hope it's clear. And this type of government is also known as a responsible government. It is also called a responsible government, right? Because in it, the executive, that is your ministers, okay, the ministers are individually and they are what? They are collectively responsible for all their acts before whom? Before the parliament, that means before the legislatures. Okay, so over here, some scholars have said that they have described that it is, some scholars they have described it is as the cabinet systems of the government. Okay, because in it the real executive powers are exercised by the cabinet. Okay, because the real powers are exercised by the cabinet. Okay, so we can see that in our country, that means the president as the head of the state. Okay, though he is a constitutional head of the state. Okay, he is a constitutional head and he is also known as a nominal head. Okay, though all the executive powers are vested with him, that means with president. Okay, but he himself does not exercise it. Who exercises it, students? In reality, the Council of Ministers along with the Prime Minister exercise it. Okay, that is why it is also been called as a cabinet system of the government. Okay, I hope it's very, very clear, right? So next one is the parliamentary government is the one in which the executive has two parts. So they are the nominal one and they are the real one. Okay, nominal one. Just now I have said that nominal is for the namesake, right? So nominal executive is the constitutional. Okay, here you can see here. So nominal executive is the constitutional as well as just for the namesake. Okay, who does not possess the real powers. Okay, and nominal executive is neither responsible nor accountable to the parliament, students. Okay, so whereas real executive is the head of the government or the head of the country, which are elected directly by the people of the country, and they are responsible and they are accountable to the parliament and the country as a whole. Okay, I hope it's very, very clear, right? So nominal executive are the one who has been appointed, like who is just for a namesake. Okay, but he does not possess the real powers. All the powers has been exercised, though the powers is vested with him. Okay, but the real power has been exercised by whom? By the Council of Ministers along with the Prime Ministers. Okay, so you can see here in the screen. So executive, there are the two parts, right? Nominal executive is your president. Okay, who is recent president, students? Ramnath Kovind is your recent president now. Okay, so and real executive is your prime ministers, and Shri Narendra Damodar Modi is your current Prime Minister of India. Okay, so president is a nominal executive, or it can also be called as a titular executive, please do not forget it, and prime minister is called a real executive head of the government. Okay, I hope it's very clear. Now we'll be discussing about the features of the parliamentary forms of government one by one. Okay, so salient features of the parliamentary form of government. Okay, let us start with number one difference, that is your difference between the nominal and the real executive. Just now I've explained the differences between the nominal and the real executive, but then also let me make it more clear. Okay, so the differences between the nominal and the real executive. So in a parliamentary form of government, the executive has two parts, that is a nominal executive and the real executive. Over here we can say that, students, the head of the state is the nominal executive, right? So all the executive powers are vested with him, that means are vested with the president. Okay, but he himself does not exercise it. Okay, so though in a parliamentary form of government, the country runs in the name of the nominal head. Okay, the country runs in the name of the nominal head, but in reality, or in a real sense, the power lies in the hands of the prime minister and his council of ministers. I hope I'm clear, right? So these are in reality exercised by whom? By the council of ministers, with the prime minister as its head, and the prime minister is known as your real executive. Okay, so that means that the head of the state is only a nominal and the constitutional head of the executive, in whose name the prime ministers and the council of ministers really exercise all the executive powers. Okay, I hope I'm very clear. Okay, so this is the differences between the nominal and the real executive. Okay, now next one. This is very simple. So next one is your close and a continuous relationships between the legislature and the executive. Okay, so let me read it out. In a parliamentary form, the executive is very closely related to the legislature. Okay, that means they have a close and continuous relationships. I've already told you, right? So in this type of government, that means in this parliamentary form of government, the executive, okay, and the legislature, they have a close and continuous relationships. Okay, why? Because the executive is constituted, or it is born out from the legislature. Okay, it is constituted out of the legislature. Okay, and the leader of the majority party in the legislature, it gets appointed as the prime ministers. Okay, so the leader of the majority party, students, okay, in the legislature, leader of the majority party in the legislature, I've already told you before also when we were talking about this responsible government, when I was explaining you about the responsible government in the meaning of the parliamentary form of government, I've told you that the leader of the majority party in the legislature, it gets appointed as what? As the prime minister. Okay, and all of the ministers are also drawn from amongst the members of the majority party in the legislature. I hope it's very clear, students. And I've also told you that upon his recommendation, that means upon the recommendation of whom? Of prime ministers, or the council of ministers are getting appointed. Okay, they are appointed out of the legislators belonging to his own party, Okay, and if a non-member of the legislature is made a minister, okay, if a non-member of the legislature is made a minister, what happens is that he has to secure the membership of either house. Either house means either he have to secure the membership either in the Lok Sabha, or he have to secure the membership either in the Rajya Sabha. Okay, so of the legislature within a 6 fixed period, that means within the 6 months, okay, within the fixed period is just 6 months. If any of the non-members of the legislature has been made a ministers, that means that particular person has to secure the membership from either of the house. That is, he has to be the member from he has to secure the membership either from Lok Sabha or either from Rajya Sabha within 6 months. There is a fixed period, right? So in case if he fails to secure that membership, okay, if he fails to secure, if he didn't get the majority number of the votes, if he didn't get the membership, okay, in either of the house, then what happens is that he has to relinquish his ministership, okay. That means what he have to do is that he has to resign from his ministership if he doesn't get the majority, okay, if he doesn't get the membership from either of the house, he has to resign from this ministership. Okay, so the ministers, along with the headships of the executive departments, they continue to be the members of the legislatures. Okay, and here we can see that in the parliamentary form of government, okay, the elections take place, right, and the party, whoever comes in the majority from the government, okay, party, whoever comes in the majority, they are the one who forms the government, okay. And over here, the leader of the majority party in the legislature gets appointed as the prime ministers, and upon his recommendations, who gets appointed? Union Council of Ministers gets appointed out of the legislators, okay, belonging to his party. Okay, I hope I'm very, very clear now. Okay, that is why there is a close and a continuous relationship between the legislature and executive, because executive itself has been constituted, or it has been born out from the legislatures only. Okay, I hope it's very, very clear. Okay, now next salient features. Okay, so next salient features is your structures of the real executive involves wills within a will. Okay, so as we can also see that the structural organization of the Council of Ministers is of the nature of wills within a will. As you can also see the pictures over here, students. Okay, so the innermost will, innermost, where you can see, okay, we can look at the pictures. The real center of the power is the office of your prime ministers. Okay, the real center of the power, students, please check it very, very properly. Okay, so the innermost will, okay, the real center of power is the office of your prime minister. That means he is very, very powerful. Okay, like he's been appointed as a leader of the majority party. Okay, he's been appointed, and after getting appointed, what he does is that he gives the recommendations of the certain ministers. Okay, and who appoints it? President appoints it, of course. Okay, and those ministers are been appointed out of the legislators belonging to his party. That means prime ministers is the very powerful one. Okay, he is the head of the government, we can say. He holds a strong position. Okay, so prime ministers is the innermost circle one, right? So, and next one is your the cabinet ministers. Okay, outside of your prime ministers is your cabinet ministers. Okay, so this minister, it consists of 15 or 20 ministers, cabinet ministers. They are also been called as the kitchen cabinet. Okay, so it consists of how many ministers? 15 ministers or 20 ministers. Okay, and who holds an important portfolios such as defense ministers, right, finance ministers, right, Minister of External Affairs. So those ministers, cabinet ministers. Okay, students, so those those ministers are consist of how many? 15 or 20 ministers. Okay, so these cabinet ministers are the one who hold an important portfolios. That means who hold an important department, right, and who together they formulate all the policies of the states. Okay, so this wheel, that means this cabinet ministers. Okay, so this wheel is called the cabinet. Okay, so it is really very, very powerful part of the real executive. It is very, very powerful, this cabinet. Okay, and next one is your the next wheel. It consists of the other ministers. That means your ministers of the state. Okay, so ministers of the state is the one who assist the cabinet ministers. Okay, they are the one who assist the cabinet ministers. Okay, so they are in charge of the small departments, okay, of the cabinet ministers. They assist or they help the cabinet ministers. I hope I'm very, very clear. And outside will is your deputy minister. Okay, so that means the outermost will, it consists of the members of the party or the deputies ministers. So they are the one who assist ministers of the state, and they are the one who assist the cabinet ministers. Okay, and there are the outermost circle is also there. Okay, the outermost circle is your secretariat. Okay, so the outermost will consists of the members of the majority party whose confidence and support in the legislature is the real source of the power of the council of ministers. Okay, as such, the council of ministers is the whole which consists of several categories of the ministers. So cabinet is a part of the council of ministers only. Do not think that cabinet is a separate one, ministers of state is a separate one, deputy ministers is a separate one. Okay, so this cabinet is a part of whom? Part of a council of ministers. Okay, but at the same time, it is the most powerful part. Okay, so the council of ministers, it consists of 70 to 80 ministers, out of which the cabinet ministers constitute the cabinet. Okay, so this cabinet ministers are also been constituted out from the council of ministers only. Okay, the difference is that they hold the real portfolios. Okay, they hold the important portfolios, and they are the one who formulate all the policies of the state, who together formulate all the policies of the state. So innermost circle is your prime ministers, who is very, very powerful and who holds an important position, that means the strong positions. And outer one is your cabinet ministers. Okay, so they are also known as a kitchen cabinet. Okay, so they are the one who hold an important portfolios and who together formulate all the policies of the state. Okay, and that is really a powerful part of the real executive. Okay, and outer one is your ministers of the state who assist the cabinet ministers. Okay, and outer one is the deputy minister who assist both the ministers of the state and who assist the cabinet ministers. Okay, over here, ministers of the state, it doesn't mean that the ministers of state of Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, it's not like that. Okay, minister of the state, it means the country as a whole, okay, of India. So outermost layer is your secretariat. Okay, so this is a structures of a real executive which involves a will within a will. Okay, I hope it's very, very clear, right, students? So next, okay, students, now let us discuss another feature, that is a ministerial responsibility. So let me read it out. The concept of the ministerial responsibility is the backbone of a parliamentary government. Responsibility of the executive before the legislature is the fundamental feature of this form of government, right? So the concept of the ministerial responsibility has three dimensions. They are: number one, responsibility of the ministers towards the head of the state; number two, individual responsibility of each ministers; next one is your collective responsibility of the council of ministers. That means all the council of ministers, that means all the ministers including the prime ministers. So let us discuss one by one. Number one, responsibility of the ministers towards the head of the state. The head of the state, the president, right? So legally all the ministers are the advisors to the head of the states. Okay, I've already told you before, students, that the president excuse me, it's a constitutional head. Okay, the head of the state is also known as a nominal executive, and all the powers, executive powers, are vested with him. That means it is vested with the president, but he himself does not exercise this. Who exercise in reality? The council of ministers along with the prime ministers as his head, and they were known as the real executive. They are the one who exercise it, right? So the prime minister act as a chief advisor over here. They are the one who advise, right? Prime minister is the one along with the council of ministers. They are the one who advise to whom? To the president, right? So all the acts of the head of the state are really the acts of the ministers, because he always acts upon the advice of the ministers. Okay, so naturally the ministers are what? They are responsible for their actions and the decisions of the head of the state. Okay, so this is number one, that is responsibility of the ministers towards the head of the state. And now number two, that is individual responsibility of each ministers. That means each minister is individually responsible. Okay, so that means the ministers, the cabinet ministers, I have already told you that the innermost one is your this thing, your prime ministers, okay, and next one is your another will, which is known as your cabinet, okay, who hold an important portfolios, important departments has been given to that particular ministers, okay, and who together they formulate the policies of the states, right? So each minister is individually responsible for the activities of the department or their ministry under his charge, okay, such as defense minister, finance ministers. They are each particular departments, they were been responsible for their activities, okay, which comes under their department, okay, or under their ministry. So he is answerable, okay, he is answerable before the legislature, okay. They are answerable for the legislature for its activities, decisions and the actions, okay. Therefore the ministers of each department, what they are answerable before the legislature for their activities and for the decisions and their actions. If anything goes wrong in the working of the department, that means he has to explain the same to the legislature as well, okay. So in case the legislature feels dissatisfied and passes a censure motion against him, then that means the minister has to resign. If a censure motion is passed in the parliament, that means a minister has to resign. So what is the meaning of censure motion, students? Censure motion, it means, so by passing this motion, by passing the censure motion, what happens is that the legislature, okay, they can show is displeasure, okay, and dissatisfactions with the working of the department or with the working of their ministers, okay. And a passing of the censure motion also means an expression of a lack of confidence in the minister against whom a censure motion is passed, and after this motion has been passed, he has to resign, okay. So that is why they are individually responsible towards the parliament, individual responsibility of each minister. Now the last one is your collective responsibility, okay. Now last one is the collective responsibility of the council of ministers. So excuse me, the ministry, that means the department, okay, that is the council of minister as a whole is responsible to the legislature, okay. So it is the responsibility of the cabinet, okay. It is the responsibility of the cabinet to get all its policies, programs, decisions and bills approved by the legislatures. I've told you that the cabinet, okay, they are the one who hold an important portfolios, they are the one who together formulate all the policies of the state, yes, okay. So that is why they are really very, very powerful part of the real executive, okay. So in case the legislature rejects any policies, okay, of the cabinet, or rejects the budget which has been prepared by it, or rejects a bill sponsored by the cabinet, okay, it is to be taken to be a vote of no confidence against the entire council of ministers. And if the vote of no confidence is passed, then the whole ministry has to resign, okay. Now what do you mean by vote of no confidence, students? Okay, so by this motion, that means by this no confidence motion, the legislature can withdraw its support to the government and it leads to the resignations of the government, okay. Or we can also say that a motion of no confidence, or we can say that a vote of no confidence or a no confidence motion is a statement or a vote about whether a person in a position of responsibility, okay, that is your government, okay, is no longer deemed fit to hold that position, perhaps because what, they are inadequate, okay, in some aspect, okay. So and they are failing to carry out the obligations and are making the decisions that other members they feel very, very detrimental, okay. So as a parliamentary motions, it demonstrates to the head of the state that the elected parliament is no longer has a confidence, okay. It can be to one members or it can be more members, okay. So the appointed government. So in some countries, if a no confidence motion is passed against an individual ministers, then they have to resign along with the entire council of ministers. But in some countries, okay, so if the no confidence motion is passed against an individual ministers, that means they have to resign along with the entire ministers, that means the entire council of ministers. Okay, so it also says the same thing. So that is why we say that the ministers, what do they do is that they swim and they sink together. Okay, so the ministers swim and sink as a team. All the ministers, what do they have to do is that they have to be collectively defend the policies and the decisions of the cabinet. Okay, they are very, very free to express their views in the meetings of the cabinet, but once a decision has been taken, they have to support it. Okay, so that is why anyone disagreeing with the decision has to quit the ministry over here. Okay, so if the vote of no confidence motion has been passed against the council of ministers or against the prime ministers, then the whole ministry have to resign. That is why they swim and sink together. That is why it is called a collective responsibility of the council of ministers. Okay, that is all the ministers including your prime ministers. Okay, so that is why they are collective responsible. Okay, I hope I'm very, very clear, right? So next one is your next feature. Okay, now next feature is your non-fixed tenure of the real executive, that is council of ministers. So let me read it out. So the council of ministers remain in office so long as it enjoys the confidence of the majority in the legislature. Okay, that means it can be removed from office at any time by the legislature, usually by the lower house and the popular house of the legislature. How they can be removed? They can be removed by passing a vote of no confidence. Okay, so we can say that there is no fixed tenure, students, or a term period of the real executive over here. As I've already told you that in the parliamentary form of government, the elections takes place and the party, whoever comes in majority, they are the one who forms the government. Okay, so the normal term of the executive is how many years? Is 5 years. Before the completion of the term also, they can be removed if the vote of no confidence is passed against the government. Then the government has to resign. That is why they don't have any fixed term. It can be removed from office at any time by the legislature. Okay, so the ministry remains in office. Okay, so the ministry, it remains in office only so long as it enjoys the confidence of the people as expressed through their legislature. So we can say that hence the tenure is not fixed. Okay, but normally however, once constituted a council of ministers, they can have a maximum tenure of 4 or 5 years, which usually is a tenure of the legislature. Okay, now next one, this is very, very simple. So prime minister as the head of your government, so as the leader of the majority party, the prime minister enjoys a position of preeminence in a parliamentary system. So we can say that his office is one of the most powerful office. Okay, he holds a very important position. Okay, he holds a very strong position. Okay, and his office is one of the most powerful office, as well as the head of the state. Okay, that means the president, he always acts according to the advice which has been made by the prime ministers. Okay, all the powers is been exercised. Okay, in reality it has been exercised by the prime ministers and the council of ministers. Okay, so the head of the state always acts according to the advice of the prime ministers. Okay, so prime minister, we can say that he is the real executive, right students? President is your nominal executive and prime minister chakere timarko real executive. Okay, so prime minister chakere is the head of the government. Okay, and enjoys a very powerful position. Okay, so prime minister is the one who enjoys a very powerful position in the parliamentary systems. Okay, so he is the one who fixes the agenda of the meetings in the cabinet. Okay, he is very, very powerful. He is the one who gives recommendations, okay, to the president. okay, for the ministers. Okay, so he's the one who hold an important position. Okay, he's the real executive head of the government. Okay, so that is why prime minister is the head of the government, and he is also known as your real executive. Okay, so this is another features of your parliamentary forms of government. Okay, I hope it's clear. So next one is a very strong position of the prime ministers. Okay, now the prime minister is the real center of power and the keystone of the entire system. So the prime minister is the real center of power and it is the keystone of the entire system. That means as the head of the government, he exercises what? He exercises the vast and the real executive powers. Okay, so the council of ministers works under his leadership. That means under the leadership of prime ministers. Okay, so he presides over the meetings of the cabinet. Okay, he is the one who presides the meetings over the cabinet. I have already told you he is the one who fixes the agenda of the meetings in the cabinet. So all the decisions of the cabinet require his individual approval, otherwise this cannot be adopted. Okay, so all the decisions of the cabinet require his individual approval, otherwise this cannot be adopted. He selects his team of ministers and allocates them their portfolios. That means the department portfolios. So at any time the prime ministers can reshuffle. Okay, that means reshuffle means to change, right? To shuffle the ministers, right? And anytime the prime ministers can reshuffle the portfolios of the ministers. You can reshuffle the portfolios, right? So ministers remain in office so long as they remain in the good books of the prime ministers. Okay, so the prime minister is that means he is the linchpin of the parliamentary executive, and the whole of the administration, we can say that it revolves around him. Okay, so whole of the administration revolves around him. That is why he hold a very strong position in the parliamentary forms of government. Okay, so this is another features of your parliamentary form of government. Okay, now next feature. Okay, so this is another feature. That means the prime ministers, which is called the prime minister or the cabinet, can get the legislature dissolved. So the prime minister has the right to advise the head of the state in favor of the dissolution of the legislature. Okay, students, this can also be done now. So the cabinet, okay, we can also say that the cabinet, and in actual practice the prime minister, he has the right to advise the head of the state in favor of the dissolutions of the legislature. Okay, so it can be done by him either for seeking a fresh mandate from the people or from punishing the legislators for their unhelpful attitude. And the head of the state, okay, is almost and always bound to accept such an advice. Okay, if the prime ministers give an advice for the dissolution of the legislature, then the president have to accept the advice. Or we can also see that if a minister does not work according to his wishes, then he can dissolve the parliament. Or if the government is in minority, that time the president will dissolve the government. But here in actual practice, the parliament has the right to advise the head of the state in favor of the dissolutions of the legislature. So it can be done by him either for seeking a fresh mandate from the people, I've already told you, okay, or for punishing the legislators for their unhelpful attitude. Okay, so the head of the state is almost always is very, very bound, and the president have to accept the advice which has been made by the prime ministers. Okay, so in other words, we can also say that the legislature can be dissolved by the executive even before the completion of its full tenure. Okay, that can also be done. So prime ministers, okay, can get the legislature dissolved. Okay, so this is another feature of the parliamentary form of government. Okay, now next feature is a political homogeneity and secrecy of the office. So let me read it out. In the parliamentary form of government, the cabinet works as a secret body and they should have the same ideology. So it means that, students, normally the members, okay, of the council of ministers, they are from the single party. Okay, so it means that and they holds the majority number of the seats in the legislatures. Okay, so they are such bound together by the commitment to a single ideology and program of the party as mandated by the people for its elections. Okay, so there should not be differences in the opinion among the single party. That means once you become the member of the party, you should follow the ideology, okay, of the party, and you have to believe in the decisions which has been made by the head. Okay, so there has to be a political homogeneity. Same ideology has to be there. If there is no political homogeneity, then there will be a chaos, right? So next one is the secrecy of office. So secrecy, furthermore, in the parliamentary form of government, students, the cabinet, they work as a secret body. I've already told you that the cabinet is the one who plays a very they are really a powerful part of the executive they are really a powerful part of the real executive. Okay, and they hold the important portfolios, and they are the one who formulate all the policies of the states. Okay, so this cabinet, it mostly consists of how many ministers? 15 or 20 ministers, but they plays a very, very important one. Okay, and they are very, very close to the prime ministers. Okay, so the meetings, okay, of the cabinet meetings have been kept very, very secret. And who fixes the agenda of the meetings of cabinet? Prime Minister fixes the agenda of the meetings of the cabinet. Okay, and the meetings have been kept secret, the deliberations have been kept secret. Okay, so are its decisions. Okay, so till this have been made public. Okay, the decisions which has been made by the cabinet have been made public either by the prime ministers or either by the other ministers. Okay, so who is authorized by the cabinet to communicate the decisions to the legislatures or to the head of the state or to the people at the large. Okay, so that is why the secrecy of the office has to be there. Okay, so secrecy of the office plays a very, very important role in the parliamentary forms of government. So this is the last features of the parliamentary form of government. Okay, I hope it's very, very clear. Okay, so please let me know if you have any doubts regarding any of the subtopics. Okay, please let me know. Okay. Okay, now let's discuss about the presidential forms of government. Okay, so let me read it out. When there is a separations of powers between the legislature and the executive, and the latter is not responsible before the former. That means latter means executive. Okay, it's not responsible before whom? Before the legislature. Okay, so the executive is termed as the presidential executive, and the system of the government is called the presidential systems. Okay, as I've already told you that in the presidential systems of the government, what happens is that there is a separations of powers. Okay, both are independent on each other, and that means the executive is not accountable and responsible towards the legislature. They are not interdependent on each other, whereas you see in the parliamentary form of government they are interdependent on each other. I have already told you that they have a close and a continuous relationships. Okay, because the executive has been constituted out of the legislature. But presidential forms of government, okay, so there is a separations of powers between the legislature and the executive. Okay, so executive is not responsible to the legislature. Okay, so it's the kind of system. So in such a system, okay, the head of the state is your president. In presidential forms of government is the system. President is the head of the state, and he is the head of the government as well. Okay, so president is the head of the state as well as he is the head of the government. Okay, and he is his own prime minister. Okay, so all the executive powers are vested in the hands of the president. Okay, and he had a fixed and a definite tenure. Okay, that means he is his own prime minister. That means he is both the head of the state. He is the head of the state as well as the head of the government. Okay, and all the executive powers are totally vested in the hands of him, and he has a fixed and definite tenure. Okay, so such kind of systems of the government is known as your presidential forms of government. Okay, I hope I'm very, very clear, right? Okay, so now next one. Okay, so there is a definitions which has been given by Gettle. Okay, and he says that presidential government is that form in which the chief executive is independent of the legislature as to his tenure and to a large extent as to his policies and acts. Okay, so this definitions, it clearly summarizes the most essential features of the presidential government, students. Okay, the presidential government, such as the separations of powers. Okay, separation of powers between whom and whom, between the legislature and between the executive. Okay, and non-responsibility. Okay, I mention it again, non-responsibility of the executive before the legislature. Okay, so in it, the executive is neither responsible to the legislature nor it is related to it. Okay, neither it can dissolve the legislature nor the legislature can remove it. Okay, so each enjoys a definite and their fixed tenure. Okay, I hope this definitions makes it very, very clear. Okay, now next one will be discussed. Okay, now next we'll discuss about the salient features of the presidential forms of government. Okay, and side by side I'll be discussing the differences also over here. Okay, differences between it and the parliamentary form. Okay, so let me read number one features, that is a single unified executive, that is no difference between the nominal executive and the real executive. It says that in a presidential government, the head of the state is both the nominal executive as well as the real executive. That means he is both the head of the state. That means who? President. Okay, President of America. Okay, he is both the head of the state as well as of the government. Okay, so he is his own prime minister. I've already mentioned that, right? So he performs all the ceremonial functions as the head of the state. Okay, and besides of that, he exercises all the real executive powers as being the chief executive head of the government. Okay, so in the presidential form, the office of the president is the most powerful office, whereas in the parliamentary form, the office of the prime minister is the most powerful office. So he holds the strong positions. Okay, in parliamentary form of government, who holds the strong position? Prime minister. Okay, there are in the presidential systems of government, who holds the strong positions? President holds a strong position, and his office is one of the most powerful office. Okay, that is why he is known as the head of the state as well as the head of the government. Okay, now let me make a difference between it. So as against this, the parliamentary executive, it has two dimensions. Okay, what are the two dimensions? They are the nominal executive and the real executive. So nominal executive, that is the head of the state. Okay, the president or the monarch. Okay, as the case may be, and the real executive ko thyo त्यति बेला parliamentary form of government ma prime ministers. Okay, prime minister as the head of the government and the cabinet. Nominal executive ko thyo in parliamentary form of government ma president or the monarch, and real executive in the parliamentary form of government, prime ministers or as the head of the government and the cabinet. Okay, please don't forget this thing. Okay, so the nominal executive is just an ornamental device in parliamentary forms of government. Okay, so all the powers are really exercised by the prime ministers and the cabinet. This I've already mentioned before when we were discussing about the parliamentary form of government, isn't it? So all the executive powers are though vested with him, though vested in the hands of the president. Okay, but he himself does not exercise it, because it has been in reality ma kole exercise girls all the powers. It has been exercised by the council of ministers along with the prime ministers. Okay, so that is why the nominal executive is just an ornamental device. Okay, so all the powers are really exercised by the prime ministers and the cabinet. So the office of the prime ministers is the most powerful office in the parliamentary form. So presidential system of Bakar ki Malai, in the presidential form ma, the office of the president ke theory is the most powerful office. There are in parliamentary form of government ma, the office of the prime minister is the most powerful office in the parliamentary form. Okay, so the duality of the executive versus a single unified executive is then the first major differences between the parliamentary and the presidential forms of government. I hope this is very, very clear. Okay, यसमा मैले features पनि I have discussed, यसमा मैले differences also I have made the differences between the presidential as well as the parliamentary forms of government. Okay, now next one is your separations. Okay. Number 2 feature is your separations of powers between the legislature and the executive. So in a presidential forms of government, the executive is independent of the legislature. As I've already told you that there is a separations of powers. Okay, separation of powers between the legislature and executive. That means they are not interdependent on each other. They are independent on their work. Okay, legislatures and executive both are independent on each other. Okay, so the membership of the two is very, very incompatible. For example, if X is a member of the legislature, suppose, okay, he cannot be simultaneously a member of the executive. Okay, suppose if X is a member of the legislature, that member he cannot be simultaneously a member of the executive as well. Okay, so the executive heads of the various government departments, okay, they are not and they cannot become the members of the legislature, which means that they have no right to participate in the activities of the legislature. So that is why the president, as being the head of the state and the government, is not the member of the legislature. That is why they are not accountable and responsible to the legislatures. Okay, and the executive over here in the presidential systems of government, they are not constituted out of the legislatures, whereas we see in the parliamentary form of government, the executive has been born out or from the it is constituted out from the legislature, but here the executive has not been constituted out from the legislatures. Okay, so that is why they are not responsible. Okay, the executive, that is the president, okay, and his departments, they are not responsible and accountable to the legislature. Okay, is not accountable. As when unlike in the parliamentary forms of government, when we see that we find that there is a close relationships, right, between the two. That means between the legislature and executive. But when we look at in the presidential forms of government, we see that there is a separations of power. That means they are independent on each other. Okay, I hope it's very, very clear. Now next features is next feature is your fixed tenure of the executive and the legislature. So in a presidential forms of government, the executive has a fixed and a definite tenure before the expiry of which it cannot be removed. Okay, so in presidential forms of government, the executive, they have what tenure? They have fixed tenure and they have a definite tenure, and before the expiry of which it cannot be removed. Okay, before the expiry of its term period, the executive cannot be removed or they cannot be voted out of the power by the legislature. Okay, so we can also say that the president has a fixed and a stable tenure. Okay, so he holds office for a definite and a fixed period. Okay, so his fixed period is like 4 years. Okay, so he holds the fixed and a definite tenures. Okay, and in the presidential forms of government, the legislature also has a definite tenure, so before the expiry of which it cannot be dissolved by the executive. Okay, so the president has no power. He doesn't have any power to dissolve the legislature before the expiry of its full term. Okay, so unlike in the parliamentary form of government, we see that through the real executive is your council of ministers, which has been headed by the prime ministers. Okay, as they has a defined maximum tenure is your 4 or 5 years. Okay, but in reality it remains in power so long in parliamentary form of government, students. Okay, in reality it remains in power so long as it enjoys the support of the majority in the legislatures. Okay, so anytime the legislature can pass a vote of no confidence. Okay, if the members pass the vote of no confidence, that means if the opposition ministers pass the vote of no confidence, okay, and can remove the ministry from the power. Okay, so even when the legislature rejects a budget or a law or a policy of the government by a majority, it is to be taken as a vote of no confidence, and if the vote of no confidence has been passed, the entire ministry have to resign. Okay, so here in presidential system, it's a fixed period. Okay, then the term period of the president is your 4 years. Okay, it's a definite period. Okay, it's a fixed and stable tenures. Okay, and in the parliamentary form of government, okay, though the maximum tenure is 4 or 5 years, okay, but they can remain in power as long as they enjoy the support of the majority in the legislatures. Okay, so if the vote of no confidence motion has been passed, then the whole entire ministry have to resign. Okay, in parliamentary form of government, students. Okay, now next feature is your cabinet works as an advisory body to the president, that is your head of the state. Okay, so in the presidential system, all the powers are exercised by the president, and the cabinet performs the functions of giving advice to him. Okay, so it says that the cabinet consists, okay, in the presidential system, students, the cabinet, it consists of the heads of the various department. Okay, so who are appointed by the president. So when we see in the parliamentary form of government, okay, so after the prime minister gets appointed, okay, and he used to give recommendations of whom? He used to give recommendations of the ministers, right, upon the recommendations of the ministers, and he is the one who give portfolios to the particular ministers. Okay, and over here also in the presidential systems of government, the cabinet is also consists of the heads of the various departments or the various ministries. Okay, and the only difference over here is that the ministers or the cabinet ministers, they were known as secretaries. Okay, here in the presidential forms of government. So the cabinet, it consists of the heads of the various departments who are appointed by the president. They all are appointed by the presidents. Okay, in the parliamentary form of government, the ministers, the cabinet ministers are been appointed by whom? Are been appointed by the your prime ministers, right? But in the presidential systems of government, the ministers, that means the cabinet, which consists of the various different departments and different ministries, they are all been appointed by whom? By the president. Okay, so all the powers are exercised by the president, okay, and the cabinet performs the functions of giving advice to him. Okay, so all the powers are exercised by whom? All the powers are exercised by kole powers exercised by the presidently. Okay, and the cabinet, okay, they perform the functions, okay, of giving an advice to him. Okay, and they are the one who assist, and they are the one who give an advice to the president. Okay, so each member of the presidential cabinet, okay, has the responsibility to carry out the administrations of the state in accordance with the policies, decisions, and the directions of the president. Okay, so president is the real master of his cabinet. Okay, so over in the parliamentary form of government, who is the real master of the cabinet? Prime minister is the real master of the cabinet. He is the one who fixes the agenda of the meetings of the cabinet. But here in presidential forms of government, president is the real master of his cabinet. Okay, so his decisions are binding upon all his ministers. Okay, his decisions are totally binding. Okay, that means all the ministers have to follow that one. Okay, the decisions which has been made by the president. Okay, so ministers hold office only so long as he wants them to continue in office. Okay, so in this respect, the president under the presidential system is a distinctly advantageous positions. Okay, in comparison, when we compare with the position of the prime minister in the parliamentary system. Okay, so unlike when we see in the parliamentary form of government, the cabinet, which has been headed by the prime minister, is the most powerful center of the power in the government. Okay, isn't it? And so the cabinet headed by the prime minister is the most powerful center of the power in the government. So all the major policies, all the decisions, the laws, even war and peace, okay, decisions are in the hands of the prime ministers and his cabinet ministers, okay, in the parliamentary form of government. Okay, now next one, that is number 5 features is here: responsibility of the ministers towards the president or towards the head of the state. Okay, so let me read it out. In the system, the ministers are individually responsible to the president. Okay, so this is very, very simple. So presidential system, in presidential systems, the ministers are individually responsible. Okay, so यस्तो type of government मा चाहिँ ministers-हरु चाहिँ के हुन्छ, they are individually responsible to the president. तर unlike in the parliamentary form of government, the ministers are individually responsible towards whom? The ministers are individually responsible towards the prime ministers also, and the ministers are individually as well as collectively responsible towards the legislature. Okay, so here in the presidential forms of government मा the ministers are individually responsible to the president because the president is the one who appoints them. Okay, so that is why they are individually responsible. So who can remove them at his will? Okay, they can get removed, okay, by the president. Okay, so with or without assigning any reason. Okay, so the minister always acts in accordance with the decisions, okay, and directives of the president, who is the real executive head or the boss. Okay, so the ministers, they always have to act, okay, in accordance with the decisions and the directions given by the president, and president is their real executive head or the boss. Okay, that means he is the head of the state as well as the head of the government. Okay, and the ministers also have to work according to the advice, okay, or they have to work according to the directions that has been given by the president. Okay, so against it, the parliamentary system, okay, against it, in a parliamentary system, the ministers are individually as well as collectively responsible before the legislature for their decisions, for their policies, and for their actions. Okay, in fact, when we see the individual and the collective responsibility of the prime ministers and their council of ministers before the legislature is a very vital feature of the parliamentary form of government. Okay, so I hope it's very clear. Okay, now next one features is here: political homogeneity of the cabinet is not essential. So in this system, political homogeneity is not essential. Okay, so in this presidential system, the president, it has the right to appoint any persons. Okay, so over here political homogeneity is not a role over here. Okay, so the president has the right to appoint any person, okay, to head any government departments. Okay, so he can appoint the persons belonging to different political parties, okay, or he can appoint a man of eminence to the high offices, or he also has the right to freely choose and appoint his team of ministers and the other high officers. Okay, when you see in the parliamentary form of government, normally, okay, all the ministers, they belong to the same political party and which has a majority in the legislatures. Okay, so normally all the members of the council of ministers in the parliamentary form of government, okay, they are from a single political party, isn't it? So which holds the majority of the seats in the legislatures. So they are as such bound together by the commitment to the single ideology, okay, and the program of the party as mandated by the people in the elections. Okay, so it is also act as a guide for them. So it helps the ministers to collectively work as a committed and dedicated team. So ideological unity is a source or strength for them all. So in the parliamentary form of government, there is a political homogeneity. Okay, that means they have the same kind of ideologies. Okay, ideologies, that means they have the one single party, right? So all the members of the Council of Ministers are from one single political party and which holds the majority of seats in the legislature. But here in the presidential forms of government, what happens is that the president have the right to appoint any persons. Okay, they have the right to appoint the persons belonging to different political parties or the men of the eminence to the high offices, as well as he has the right to freely choose and appoint his team of ministers and other high officers. Okay, I hope it's very, very clear, right? So analyzing the main features of this presidential systems of the government, okay, we can say that the distinguishing characteristics of the presidential system is almost a complete separation. Okay, we can say that it's the complete separations of the executive and the legislative departments and independence of each against the other. Okay, and especially in respect of the policies and the powers and the durations of their tenures. So the chief executive is chosen for a specified term fixed by the constitution. Okay, so the members of the cabinet are appointed by him. They are subject to his directions and control. They hold the office at his pleasure. They are not and cannot act at the same time as the members of the legislature, and they are not responsible to the legislature for their official acts or for their policies. Okay, so since all these features that are present in the US political systems, okay, that is the presidential form of government is at work in it. Okay, so though the features of the parliamentary and presidential governments are basically different from each other, but both are equally powerful, both are equally popular, okay, and work as a liberal democratic governments. Okay, I hope you have understood this features of the presidential forms of government. If you have any doubts, please clear it out whenever we do the classes. Okay, students, now thank you. Stay safe. Bye bye.